Oki Niksokwags ni Daniko Apummaki, Noktu Sikohkotoki, but you can call me Lillian. My name is Apummaki, and I am from Lethbridge, which is on the blood reserve of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And this is going to be me just reading a book out loud for no real reason other than to share my culture. This is the book I will be reading from. It is called A Blackfoot History, The Winter Counts. Sike Tapi Itsiniki, Telling the Old Stories. And this was written by Paul M Raczka. So I don't know how much of this I'm going to read, but for the first video, I'll try to read a good chunk of it, and I'll see how it goes. So this is the foreword. Blackfoot Winter Counts are not only records of important annual events, but they also provide a rare look at the culture and lifestyle of a prairie nation at various times in its history. The winter counts themselves have been the subject of much examination and study. We know that the keepers of the winter counts, there were several of them, selected the most important event for the year. Sometimes they recorded an epidemic or battle that affected the whole nation, and at other times they selected personal events within their own families. Either way, each entry reflected an episode in tribal history. In this book, Paul Raczka looks beyond the simple listing of occurrences to tell the story behind the winter counts. He uses them as entries into the rich and varied history of a prairie people from the dog days to the 20th century. These winter counts are doorways, and when opened, they reveal stories of warfare, leadership, victories, and disasters over a 214-year period. Raczka begins with the Bull Plume's winter count of 1764, recorded simply as Big Smallpox Scare. This was one of the earliest records of an epidemic that swept through the Blackfoot time after time, decimating the 3 tribes of Blackfoot, Blood, and Pagan that made up the Blackfoot Nation. Raczka uses this and other entries to tell the stories of these Blackfoot people, drawing on his vast knowledge of the tribes, the tales told to him by elders, and documents of the period. He provides a fascinating glimpse past the winter counts and into the camps and lodges of a prairie people. And that was written by Hugh Dempsey, Chief Curator Emeritus, Glenbow Museum, editor of Alberta History Quarterly. And this is another portion by Eagle Speak. Our words are very important. My name is Eagle Speak. This time that my life came from, I really feel cautious when we are speaking about things and about the way we live. Spotted Eagle, the author, told me that I can talk about his stories. They just wrote them down, the begunny, and the way that we lived. He didn't come from a college or big school. He lived around the begunny, and he was around all the ceremonies that I was at. Here he really paid attention and had a very good understanding about everything that was going on. And with me, my begunny language is what made my life good. Right away I understood what he wrote. I have made very good use of my knowledge of begunny ways, all the things that were given to me and all the good things. Now the way that we live is very different. There we live now, being humble and helpful is not there anymore. We are making the Western way of life important. This makes the way we live now very hard. This makes our life very hard now. We just get sick from it. We have to put up with all the things that we are hit with, the dangerous things, alcohol, and the things that they smoke. It makes the way we live very hard. The children, the elders, we are all hit with it. Our leaders, fathers, their thoughts and rules here, Spotted Eagle, I saw what he wrote. The begunny, he has become a part of all the elders of many 100 years old. The way it was. I really feel good about it. It is just like I took back my previous life and thinking. Then I understand all these writings. They will be very helpful to our grandchildren, all of the children that are not born yet. We are given what we can tell stories about. We just put it behind us. This, our white man speaking, is how we lost it. All the things that my parents and elders invited me to know, I heard them. Try very hard to be strong. Be strong about what you hear people say. Help people, be kind and gentle. These are things that will be helpful to you. Well, stories, these are the laws. They are not written down. The way the stories go, the one who told the story helps us to know ahead of time. That is the way with our bundles, why we don't make mistakes. They all have stories, the same for all the songs. We are all relatives to the things that fly around, the water people, the ground people. We are all related to these things. The songs came from them and they are transferable. Itsik Bumaksin, passed on through ceremony. This is how we understand life now, the written material. I saw them as stories that Spotted Eagle put together. Our fathers made available to us so we can know the stories, so we can know about our fathers' stories, how the life was back in the olden days. The schools didn't have them written among their stories. We can just take back all the stories and knowledge that they took away. Now we can start telling the real stories about how it was. Our children can hear them and they can understand how our fathers lived. It is far different than the way we live now. I really believe that their work is put ahead of everything, the elders. This type of work is put way low in importance. We don't get benefits for it. The elders interview and tell about our holy things. They are all a part of it. This is how these writings are all about ourselves, the way that we were taught, and how I understand you. It is totally different than the way I live. I am humiliated and I am scared about it, the English speaking. We still talk in two ways. They are not real. These are things that I know after I start rethinking. This is the way we live, and now when our children complete school, they will understand real life, real thoughts, and then we can live like the writings and stories. Because they are our laws and rules, so that they can continue to be told with them that still speak our language. It is most important that our mistakes are the blame of our English speaking. Our native language has made us very pitiful and humble. It was made so that we can understand what is not good and that we should not use all these things that are bad for us. Loneliness, scary thoughts, fright are what had made us all sick. Our language is most important in our life. With this, so we can understand life and about our Creator. This is why I am really guiding them straight. Spotted Eagle will get many good things and good luck in life because of these really good things that he has told stories about. Well, that is all. So this is from Peter Strikes with a Gun, former Beaver Bundle owner, former head chief of the Piikani Nation, Northern Pagan Blackfoot, Brockett, Alberta. Peter Strikes with a Gun, as well as Earl Old Person, grew up speaking Blackfoot as their primary language and continue to do so in their everyday life. To give the reader a feel for the rhythm and thought process of the language, we've translated Peter's Blackfoot statements as closely as possible. Our thanks to Marvin Weatherwax Sr. for his help in doing this. And this is another passage from Earl Old Person. Uki, my name is Earl Old Person. I'm a member of the Blackfeet tribe of the Blackfeet Reservation. My Indian name is Cold Wind, Isto So Bot, and my other Indian name is Charging Horse, Akya Ba Gya Bi. Cold Wind is a name I gave to myself when I was a very small boy, and I heard the Indian name Ito So Bot, and I was concerned and wanted to know what it meant. And my mother told me it was Cold Wind, and I told my mother from here on my name is going to be Isto So Bot. So I'm known by this name by all people. But the name that was given to me by my grandfather, Old Bear Medicine, he gave me the name Akya Ba Gya Bi, Charging Home. It was a warrior's name. This was my mother's father, Old Bear Medicine. Not too many know me by this name, but that was my name given me when I was just a baby. I've lived a long time around many things and by many people that I observed. people that I admired many times over by the things that they stood for, not because I knew them personally that well, but the stories I had heard of them. And it brings pride to people when you hear these kinds of stories. We have people today that have become very concerned and were very interested in knowing about our ways and how our people lived, and the things that we are trying to follow just by knowing and hearing of some of their ways. And the people I'm talking about, these people who are non-Indian, white people, but they have taken a lot of time to gather information to find out about the things of the Native people, what they stood for. I read books. I like to read books, especially when things that I read pertain to my people and to the natives of Indian country. When I hear of the many things that they had done to cause we the people today to exist and to continue, looking back and try to relive some of those things that we are able to do and show our young people that they may be able to use, I thank and admire those people that take that time, a non-Indian, and be able to put it into a way that we could read and to help the ways of our people. We have a lot of our young people today that's trying to find things to understand where we come from, how our people lived, the things our people done to help our ways to continue. We cannot go back to the old ways of how our people were known as warriors, how they lived the harsh times. But we can learn to become strong and to be a person that's determined to continue the things that we are able to do to help our young people understand our way of life. This through reading books, this through hearing stories. Our elders are gone that can go back and tell stories that they would want us to hear and understand. But we still have those people that took enough time to bring out some of those things that they were able to gather, put together, and to show we the people of the present days to understand and be able to relay these things to our young people, to the people that are wanting to understand the ways of our Native people. So today, I really commend people like Paul Raczka, who are one of those individuals that have done things to put together something that our people can follow. It may have been a time that perhaps it was difficult for them to gather these informations, but through their determination, they continued finding those ways because they had concerns about the ways of our Indian people. And just by hearing some of the stories, reading some of the stories of our people, of their braveness, of them being strong, it brings to us that had it not been for them being strong and being individuals that did not give up, we continue to exist. We continue to observe those things that they stood for. So many thanks to all that helped bring together our history, whether it's by the Blackfeet or by the Blackfeet of the Blackfeet or other nations. We're all together in this, and we're going to be together as we go forth. Thank you. Earl Old Person, lifetime traditional head chief of the Blackfeet tribe, South Pagan Blackfoot, Browning, Montana. So this is chapter 1, the introduction. Siketapi itsiniki is just that, telling the old stories. Each story stands alone and carries its own lesson. Each was told at the appropriate time and place to pass on a teaching related to the situation. That is what Blackfoot history really is, a lesson to learn from things that happened in the past. The Siksikaitsitapi, the Blackfoot people, take that definition literally. Within the Blackfoot worldview, an exact date for an event is not necessarily the most important lesson. Memorizing specific dates of events is not as important as learning the teachings the event provided. To benefit from this collection of teachings, it is necessary to suspend the Euro concept of history, the Euro reckoning of time, and the standardization of the importance of events. It will become clear to the reader that in the winter counts presented here, an event may be recorded a year or two in either direction from the date recorded in Euro-Canadian American history. It will also become clear that a reverse process was used by some of those non-Blackfoot who first recorded these winter counts to fit them into their timeline of history. Rather than starting with a date and recording an event, the existing event was placed in a date established or presumed within the Euro history calendar. In some cases, this was done by the Blackfoot keepers of the individual winter count during the reservation period to make it acceptable and legitimate in non-Blackfoot concepts of written history. The early reservation period brought an overpowering movement by the dominant society to civilize the Blackfoot people into Euro lifestyles and beliefs. One of the ways they attempted this was to trivialize Blackfoot culture and worldview. In their view, it was of no worth, primitive, and needed to be eliminated for the people to advance into civilized society. Many Blackfoot people fought these attempts and maintained the traditional culture. A few attempted to show the dominant society the value of Blackfoot worldview, history, and culture. This was accomplished to a limited extent with an influx of scholars to the reservations seeking to record that very culture. They sought out the intellectuals of Blackfoot culture and found those individuals who saw this as an opportunity to present and preserve the legitimacy of their culture and history to Euro society. These scholars, or their field workers, wrote down the stories as they were told. However, when the information was published, it was in many cases modified to fit the scholars' preconceptions or theories. For years, these stories, written in the words of the Blackfoot people, sat unread. Other stories are still told by elders and medicine bundle owners. By bringing both together, we hope to tell these stories as the Blackfoot people know and tell them. Blackfoot worldview and history presented by those Blackfoot intellectuals, standing within the world's history and every bit as valid as that of the dominant society. History is a matter of perspective. Usually it is told from that of the victor, but in all cases it is from the viewpoint of the writer. Each writer brings his own experiences and interests to his writing, and that affects the perspective of the events being written about. It also affects just which events are considered noteworthy of recording or remembering. Therefore, knowing something about the writer and his personal history is almost as important. Sorry, my phone almost died. Therefore, knowing something about the writer and his personal history is almost as important as the events recorded. In that way, we can judge his recordings and insights on the basis of his personal perspectives. And that is the basis for this book, a history of the Blackfoot Nation told by the Blackfoot people. It is a history that starts at the very beginning and is passed down through oral tradition until the time of writing. What little is known of the writers will be included so the reader can form his own judgments. Their biographies and qualifications are just as important as the stories themselves, for they form the perspective of the story as it is presented. The stories selected here are part of a large pool of oral history that still exists among the Blackfoot people. The same story may vary with details among different tellers, but the overall teaching always remains the same. Those selected were given by persons of tribally acknowledged ritual knowledge, and were often medicine bundle holders or tribal leaders. What is missing from these written accounts is the visual beauty and emotion of the storyteller. Watching the story being told was involving the listener totally into the experience, with both the teller and listener forgetting the present surroundings. Hand gestures, including sign language at times, and body movements were accompanied by songs in the correct places, a dying skill these days. For those who argue oral history does not accurately portray history, we would like to point out a couple of things. When a group of people depend only upon an oral passing of knowledge, the accuracy of that knowledge becomes much greater than in a society dependent upon written knowledge. For example, songs for many Blackfoot ceremonies were recorded in 1903 and 1904. When comparing them to those in use today by individuals who had no access to the recordings, not only were the words the same, but also the vocables in the main part of the song. This is over a 100-year period. Also, despite the claim by Euro historians that the Blackfoot originated in the Slave Lake area of northern Alberta, newer archaeological research tends to support the early Blackfoot oral history. The evidence is beginning to show that Proto-Blackfoot lived where their history states, along the eastern front of the Rocky Mountains, at least as long as 300 to 400 BC. It seems oral history is proving more accurate than we give it credit. The majority of these stories were told and recorded by non-native people who had an overwhelming interest in the Blackfoot worldview and history. They had the opportunity to write the stories of the last of the Buffalo people in the words and viewpoints of those people. Those Blackfoot of past years felt the need to have their history and viewpoint recorded for future generations of their own people. But for many years, these stories sat in ledgers and notes in private libraries and dusty archives. A few were inserted in books and articles to lend authenticity to non-native writers' viewpoints, but they were usually just considered anecdotal and quaint. Others used them as fillers in histories written about the Euro-North Americans and their accomplishments. A very few authors published them with all the authenticity and respect they deserved. But these authors were few and far between. Their works are also included as part of this history. Each person in the long chain, from the early Blackfoot to the present, had their strengths and weaknesses. These also are important to note and recognize. For the early Blackfoot, it was their qualifications as ceremonialists, for it was in the ceremonial teachings the complete stories were passed. For later generations, it was their ability to remember or interpret events recorded in the winter count pictographs or syllabic writings. Then there was the final telling to the non-Blackfoot, the skill of the translators and their knowledge of old Blackfoot language and Blackfoot culture. Some of these interpreters were converted Christians who tried to put a more civilized spin on the stories being told. Others had never been involved in the traditional religion and ceremonies and didn't really understand what was being told. And yet others were just doing a job and had no interest in the material or perfecting the translations. The non-Blackfoot recorders of these stories fall into two categories. One group recorded the stories exactly as they were told. The others recorded them and then interpreted them to fit their own preconceived theories. In these cases, we went back to the recorder's original field notes for the true story. Blackfoot language, interpreters, and translations. The Blackfoot language is a beautiful, complex language which carries philosophical and worldview information that defies simple, direct translation. Much like the pictographs in the winter counts, individual words contain more information than meets the eye or ear. This worldview is built upon the interpretation of specific events or emotions, and assigned a word or phrase agreed upon by the people. Thus, even though an individual has a conversational ability in the language, unless he or she has been exposed to the context and circumstances in which it is used, a direct translation would lack information. In many of these stories, the speaker, who spoke English as a second language, insisted on telling the stories in Blackfoot to ensure the correct information was given. Discussions followed concerning specific words or phrases to arrive at the closest English equivalent to the Blackfoot worldview concept being expressed. This was also helpful concerning intended meanings in previously translated stories. The term worldview is often tossed about in literature without a clear understanding of the term. One way to explain it is to take a simple word like owl. When you say the word owl to a person whose first language is English, they would mentally interpret it as bird of prey, hunts at night, eats mice and other rodents, wise, associated with the supernatural at times. A Blackfoot word for owl, sibisto, creates a very different mental image. He is literally night announcer. and can come to warn people of a potential death or bad luck. He is also the spirit of a past medicine pipe owner. His prepared skin is in the medicine pipe bundle itself, adding the owl's spiritual power to help the people. By wearing his feathers, a man would gain his spiritual power in going to war. Two very different cultural visual images and interpretations for the same bird. Thus, a Blackfoot worldview is created within and by the language, giving us a very different way of looking at and interacting with the world in general. It is for this reason Blackfoot elders, as well as those of other tribes and cultures, consider the loss of language the beginning of the loss of identity as a separate and distinct people. Words also change meaning as well as implied meaning, depending on the context in which they are used. In other cases, once the subject is established, a different or shorter version of the subject word is used during the same conversation. For example, when discussing antelope, sokyawakasi, prairie deer, the complete word is first used to establish the subject. Thereafter, in the conversation, it may be referred to just as awakasi, deer, antelope being considered a part of the deer family. However, participants in the conversation understand that it is still referring to an antelope. A sacred language of sorts also exists. Words that mean one thing in common everyday conversations change meaning when used in the sacred or holy context. For example, the word matapi means person in everyday conversation. However, when discussing holy subjects or the Blackfoot worldview, it could also mean spirit. Thus, when a person says he was visited by a person, it could mean just that in everyday conversation. But if they were discussing holy matters, he would mean he was visited by a spirit. Context of the conversation is all important. The understanding of these changes is important in the reading of the story translations done by various researchers. Several other things need to be considered when using the translations. First is the worldview and ceremonial knowledge of the original Blackfoot speaker. Secondly, the same knowledge of the interpreter comes into play. They have to know the true meaning of the word within the context of the conversation. Third, we have the knowledge and fluency of English by the interpreter. Here, in most cases, we have a person with a high understanding of their native language and a rudimentary knowledge of a second language. And last, we have the recorder who may or may not have preconceived ideas regarding the topic of discussion. A recorder who is a true ethnographer will write exactly what was translated without embellishing or modifying it to fit their own preconceived ideas or the current theories regarding the topic. As A.C. Haddon, an anthropologist who worked with Edward Curtis for a time, explained, it is therefore not to be wondered at that the published accounts of American Indians, and indeed of all native peoples who are investigated in a similar manner, are liable to vary and to be of varying reliability. The chances of misunderstanding creeping in are considerable, even when informant, interpreter, and investigator are watchful and honest. How much more so when one of the three links in the chain is careless or prejudiced. And so that's the introduction to chapter 1. And I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to drink coffee. And I will continue with this chapter 1.